The Wyoming prairie stretched endless under a sky bruised with dawn's first light. But for Samuel Hayes, that morning carried a weight heavier than any storm. He'd seen plenty in his 40 years: war's cruelty, men's greed, the raw indifference of the frontier. But nothing could have braced him for what lay slumped against his weathered fence post. A girl, barely 16, her wrists raw from rope burns, her face pale as the frost dusting her tangled chestnut hair. She wasn't moving. Samuel froze, his breath catching in the cold air. Was she dead? He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the frozen grass, and saw the faint rise of her chest. Alive, but only just. Her dress, once a soft blue, was torn at the shoulder, and her lips were cracked from days without water. A tarnished silver locket hung from her neck, glinting faintly in the dawn. Who could leave a child like this, abandoned like a broken tool on the edge of nowhere? He knelt beside her, his calloused hands steady as he drew his knife to cut the A. Ropes, 20 years on this ranch, alone with his cattle and his ghosts, had taught him to mind his own business. But this was different. As the ropes fell away, the girl stirred, her eyes snapping open, wild, green, and fierce with fear. She scrambled back, pressing herself against the fence, her voice a hoarse rasp. "Don't come near me!" Samuel raised his hands, keeping his distance. He was a big man, broad from years of hauling hay and breaking horses, but he softened his voice, the way he'd calm a spooked colt. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you. Name's Samuel Hayes." Her gaze darted over his face, searching for deceit, but something in his steady gray eyes seemed to ease her panic. She didn't bolt. "What's your name?" he asked, still crouched to seem less threatening. "Emma," she whispered, the words slipping out like a secret she hadn't meant to share. Samuel nodded, glancing at the churned earth near the fence. Wagon tracks, fresh and deep, stretched into the distance. Someone had driven her here in the dead of night and left her to the mercy of wolves or weather. His jaw tightened. Wyoming was no place for mercy, but this was cruelty of a different kind. Before he could ask more, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. A boy, no older than 12, peeked from behind a nearby boulder, his freckled face smudged with dirt. He clutched a worn slingshot, his eyes wide with worry. "Is she okay, mister?" he called, his voice trembling but bold. Samuel squinted. "Who are you, kid?" "Jasper," the boy said, stepping forward. "Jasper Tate. I live over at the Miller Ranch. I was checking my snares when I saw her. Didn't know what to do." His gaze flicked to Emma, and Samuel caught the flicker of guilt in the boy's eyes, like he'd been too scared to help sooner. Samuel softened. "You did right coming to me, Jasper. Now run home and stay there. This ain't your trouble." Jasper hesitated, then nodded and darted off, his small figure vanishing into the prairie. Samuel turned back to Emma, who was watching him now, her breathing steadier, but her hands still trembling. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded, struggling. To her feet, clutching the locket like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. Samuel noticed the way she favored her right side, the faint wince of pain she tried to hide. Someone had hurt her, and not just with ropes. The thought stirred a memory he'd buried deep, his own childhood, marked by a father's fists and a mother's silence. "Let's get you inside," he said, gesturing toward his cabin, a sturdy log structure nestled against a low hill. "Got coffee and a fire to warm you up." Emma hesitated, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting pursuit. Then, with a small nod, she followed, her steps slow but determined. As they crossed the yard, Samuel's gaze caught something, glinting in the dirt near the fence, a brass button engraved with a coiled snake. It wasn't his, and it hadn't been there yesterday. He pocketed it, a cold unease settling in his chest. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the simple room. A wooden table, a single chair, a shelf of worn books. Samuel poured water into a tin cup, and set it before Emma, who sat rigidly, her hands wrapped around the locket. "Drink slow," he said. She obeyed, but her eyes kept darting to the door, like she expected it to burst open. Samuel leaned against the wall, studying her. "Who did this to you, Emma?" Her cup froze halfway to her lips. For a moment, her face was blank. Not confusion, but the careful mask of someone who knew too much. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My father." The words hit Samuel like a bullet. He'd spent 2 decades running from his own father's shadow, building a life where no one could hurt him again. Now, here was this girl, carrying the same kind of pain he'd tried to forget. He wanted to ask more, but the distant thud of hooves stopped him cold. He moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. Dust rose on the horizon, 3 riders approaching fast, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. "Stay here," he told Emma, his voice low but firm. He grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace, his heart pounding with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Whoever was coming, they weren't bringing good news. But as he stepped toward the door, one question burned in his mind. What kind of man could tie his own daughter to a fence and ride away? And what did those riders want with her? Who were those riders racing toward Samuel's ranch, and what dark secrets were they chasing? Keep watching to uncover the truth behind Emma's desperate flight! Samuel's cabin smelled of pine and coffee, the fire casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Emma sat at the table, her hands still clutching the silver locket, its chain worn thin from years of nervous fingers. The tin cup of water trembled in her grip, though she tried to hide it with a stubborn tilt of her chin. Samuel stood by the window, his rifle resting against the wall, his eyes fixed on the dust cloud growing closer. 3 riders moving fast. He didn't need to be a prophet to know trouble was riding with them. "Emma," he said, his voice low, steady, like he was coaxing a skittish mare. "You said your father did this. I need more than that. Who is he, and why'd he leave you out there like that?" Emma's green eyes flickered with something sharp. Fear, yes, but also defiance. She set the cup down, the clink loud in the quiet room. "His name's Thomas Garrett," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not my real father, my stepfather. Been raising me since I was 6, after my ma died." She paused, her fingers tightening around the locket. "He said I was a burden. Said he was done carrying me." Samuel's jaw clenched. He knew that kind of talk, the kind that cut deeper than any blade. His own father had called him worse before selling him off to settle a debt. He pushed the memory down, focusing on Emma. Why the fence? Why my land? Emma's gaze dropped to the table, tracing the grain of the wood with a fingertip. "He gambles, owes money to bad people. Said he could trade me to clear his slate, but—" Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard. "He changed his mind. Said I wasn't worth enough to save him." The words landed like a stone in Samuel's chest. He'd seen men trade horses, land, even their honor, but a child. His hands curled into fists, the brass button with the coiled snake pressing into his palm from his pocket. "Who's he owe, Emma? Who's he scared of?" Before she could answer, a sharp knock rattled the cabin door. Samuel spun, grabbing his rifle, his heart kicking like a mule. "Stay put," he told Emma, who nodded, her eyes wide but steady. He cracked the door open, just enough to see young Jasper Tate standing there, his freckled face flushed from running. "Mr. Hayes," Jasper panted, clutching his slingshot like a lifeline. "Them riders. They're almost here. I saw 'em from the hill. 3 men, and one's got a scar across his cheek. Looked mean as a rattlesnake." Samuel's gut twisted. "Jasper, I told you to go home." "I know, but I couldn't just—" "Sit there." Jasper's voice cracked, his eyes darting to Emma. "She don't deserve this, mister. I—" I want to help. Samuel hesitated. The boy was young, but there was a fire in him, the kind that reminded Samuel of himself at that age, scared but too stubborn to run. All right, he said finally. You stay low, out of sight. If things go south, you run to the Miller Ranch and tell him what's happening. Understand? Jasper nodded, slipping behind a barrel near the porch. Samuel turned back to Emma, who was watching him with a mix of hope and dread. You know how to use a gun? He asked. She shook her head, her locket glinting as she moved. Never had to. Well, you might need to learn quick, Samuel said, pulling a small pistol from a drawer. He set it on the table, not pushing it toward her but leaving it within reach. Just in case. Emma stared at the pistol, her lips parting slightly, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she reached for the locket, popping it open to reveal a faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a soft smile. This was my ma, she said quietly. She used to say the prairie could break you, but it could also make you stronger. I'm trying to believe her. Samuel felt a pang, the kind that came from recognizing someone else's pain as your own. He wanted to tell her she was already stronger than most, but the sound of hooves grew louder, pulling his attention back to the window. The riders were close now, their shadows stretching long across the yard. He could make out the scarred man Jasper described, his face hard and unyielding, flanked by two others with the cold confidence of hired guns. Emma, Samuel said, his voice firm but gentle. Whatever happens, you stay behind me. We'll figure this out. He didn't know if he believed his own words, but the way Emma nodded, clutching her mother's locket, made him want to try. As he stepped toward the door, rifle in hand, one thought burned clear. Whoever these men were, they weren't taking Emma without a fight. But what had Thomas Garrett gotten her into, and how deep did this trouble run? Who are these riders? And what dangerous debt is chasing Emma across the Wyoming prairie? Stay tuned to find out what secrets they're bringing to Samuel's doorstep. The Wyoming wind carried a bite as Samuel stepped onto his porch, rifle steady in his hands, the weight of it grounding him against the storm brewing in his chest. The three riders had slowed their horses to a walk, their silhouettes sharp against the golden haze of the rising sun. The scarred man in the center, his cheek carved by some long-ago blade, sat tall in the saddle, his eyes cold and unblinking. Flanking him were two younger men, their hands resting on holstered pistols, their faces set with the grim confidence of those who'd drawn blood before. Samuel's gaze flicked to the brass button in his pocket, its coiled snake engraving a silent warning. These weren't drifters. They were hunters. Emma stood just inside the cabin, her back pressed against the wall, the pistol Samuel had left, still untouched on the table. Her green eyes followed his every move, wide but resolute, the silver locket at her throat catching the firelight. Jasper crouched behind the barrel outside, his slingshot taut, though Samuel prayed the boy wouldn't do anything foolish. This was no place for a child. But then again, neither was the world Emma had escaped. "Morning, stranger," the scarred man called, his voice smooth but laced with menace. He tipped his hat, a mockery of courtesy. "Name's Caleb Vance. We're here on business. Got word you're harboring a runaway." Samuel's grip tightened on the rifle, but he kept his voice even, like he was bartering over cattle. "No runaways here. Just me and my land. You boys lost?" Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we ain't lost. We're looking for a girl. About 16, brown hair, answers to Emma. Belongs to a man named Thomas Garrett. He's real eager to have her back." Emma's sharp intake of breath behind Samuel was barely audible, but it cut through him like a knife. He didn't turn, keeping his eyes on Caleb. "Don't know any Emma," he lied, his tone flat. "And I don't take kindly to men riding up uninvited, making demands." The rider to Caleb's left, a wiry man with a patchy beard, spat into the dirt. "Don't play dumb, rancher. We tracked her here. Saw the wagon marks by your fence. Hand her over, and we ride out peaceful. Samuel's mind raced. The wagon tracks, the button. Thomas Garrett hadn't just left Emma to die. He'd sent these men to make sure the job was finished. But why? What was she to them, beyond a gambler's debt? He shifted his stance, angling the rifle slightly. "You're on my property," he said. "Only thing you're getting is a warning. Turn around, or we'll have a different kind of conversation." Caleb's smile faded, his hand drifting toward his pistol. "You're outnumbered, friend, and you don't know who you're crossing. Thomas works for a man who don't like loose ends. Marcus Develin ring a bell?" The name hit Samuel like a cold wind. Every rancher in Wyoming knew Marcus Develin, a cattle baron with a grip on half the territory. His wealth built on fear and bullets. If Develin was involved, this wasn't just about Emma. It was about power. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "What's Develin want with a girl?" Caleb leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping low. "She's collateral. Garrett's debts, past due, and Emma's the price. Develin don't take kindly to cheats, or to folks who meddle in his business." He gestured to the horizon, where a faint trail of dust lingered. "Garrett's on his way with more men. You got till noon to decide how this ends." Samuel's heart sank, but he didn't flinch. Noon was hours away, but the threat was clear. Hand over Emma, or face Develin's wrath. He glanced at the cabin, where Emma's silhouette was just visible through the window. She was listening, her locket clutched tight, her face pale but fierce. He thought of his own past, of the man who'd sold him to settle a debt, of the scars he still carried. He'd run then. He wouldn't run now. "Tell Develin to come himself if he wants to talk," Samuel said, his voice hard. "Till then, get off my land," Caleb chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Brave words, Hayes. Hope you're ready to back 'em up." He wheeled his horse around, the others following, but not before the wiry man tossed something into the dirt. A small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and curling. It landed near the porch, a deliberate taunt. As the riders retreated, Samuel stepped forward, keeping his rifle raised until they were out of sight. Only then did he pick up the book, its cover embossed with a faint cross. A prayer book, the kind carried by frontier families. He opened it, and a loose page fluttered. Out, a child's drawing of a woman with long hair, labeled Mama in shaky script. His throat tightened. Was this Emma's? Or was it bait, meant to draw her out? Inside, Emma hadn't moved, but her eyes were fixed on the book in his hands. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samuel handed it to her, watching as she traced the drawing with a fingertip. "It's mine," she whispered. "Ma gave it to me before she passed. Thomas took it when he started gambling." Her voice hardened. "He must have given it to them, to prove they know me." Samuel nodded, the pieces falling into place. Thomas Garrett wasn't just a coward. He was desperate, and desperate men made dangerous choices. He set the book on the table next to the pistol. "Emma, you said Thomas isn't your real father. Who is?" Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw the weight of a secret she wasn't ready to share. "I don't know," she said, too quickly. "Ma never told me. All I know is Thomas hated me for it, like I was a reminder of something he couldn't stand." Samuel didn't press. He'd learned long ago that some truths needed time to surface. Instead, he moved to the window, checking the horizon. The riders were gone, but the dust trail lingered, a promise of more to come. He thought of Jasper, hidden outside, and hoped the boy had the sense to stay put. This was no game, and the stakes were climbing higher by the minute. "Samuel," Emma said, her voice soft but steady. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You could have turned me over and saved yourself." He turned, meeting her gaze. Her question echoed one he'd asked himself years ago, when he'd fled his father's cruelty. "Because I know what it's like to have no one," he said, and because I'm tired of looking away." Emma's eyes softened, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips, like a crack of sunlight through storm clouds. She reached for the pistol, her fingers hesitant but resolute. "Then teach me," she said. "I don't want to be helpless." Samuel nodded, a quiet pride stirring in him. But as he began to show her how to hold the gun, a distant sound froze them both, a low, mournful howl rising from the prairie. Wolves, drawn by the scent of trouble. Or was it something worse, lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting for noon? To strike? What secret is Emma hiding about her real father? And what will happen when Thomas Garrett arrives with Develin's men? Don't miss the next part to see how this showdown unfolds. Samuel's hands were steady as he showed Emma how to grip the pistol, his voice calm despite the howl of wolves echoing across the prairie. The cabin's fire flickered, casting a warm glow over Emma's face, her green eyes fierce with determination. The silver locket at her throat gleamed as she practiced aiming at an imaginary target, her fingers no longer trembling. Samuel watched her, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. She was young, but she had a fire that reminded him of the boy he'd been, scared but unwilling to break. "Keep your wrist firm," he said, adjusting her stance. "Breathe out when you pull the trigger. It'll steady your shot." Emma nodded, her jaw set, but her gaze kept darting to the window, where the horizon lay quiet. For now. Noon was approaching, and with it, Thomas Garrett and whatever men he'd brought. Samuel glanced at the table, where the prayer book lay open to Emma's childhood drawing of her mother. The sight of it stirred something in him, a memory of his own mother's voice, soft and fleeting, before his father's cruelty drowned it out. A rustle outside broke the silence. Samuel raised a hand, signaling Emma to stay quiet, and moved to the door. He cracked it open, rifle ready, only to see Jasper slipping out from behind the barrel, his freckled face pale but resolute. "Mr. Hayes," he whispered, "I saw something. There's a wagon coming slow, about a mile out. Looks like Garrett's men, but they're dragging something behind them." Samuel's blood chilled. Dragging something? A warning, like the button or the book. "What's it look like, Jasper?" "Dunno," Jasper said, clutching his slingshot. "Too far to tell, but it's heavy. Kicked up a lot of dust." Samuel nodded, his mind racing. "Good work, kid. Now get inside. You're safer here." Jasper hesitated, then darted into the cabin, staying low by the wall. Emma lowered the pistol, her eyes locking onto Samuel's. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" she said, her voice steady but laced with dread. "Looks that way," Samuel admitted, checking his rifle's ammunition. "But they'll have to go through me first." Emma's lips parted as if to argue, but instead she asked, "Why do you trust me?" "I could be lying. Could be trouble you don't need." Samuel met her gaze, seeing the weight of years spent proving her worth to a man who didn't care. "Because I know what it's like to be called trouble," he said. "And because those eyes of yours don't lie." For a moment the cabin felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken understanding. Then Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I didn't tell you about my real father." She clutched the locket, her knuckles white. "Ma said he was a powerful man, someone who'd cast us out when I was born. I think it's Marcus Develin." The name hung heavy, like a storm cloud ready to break. Samuel's breath caught. If Develin was Emma's father, this wasn't just about a gambler's debt. It was personal, twisted in ways he couldn't yet untangle. "Why didn't you say before?" he asked, not accusing, just searching. "Because I'm ashamed," Emma said, her voice cracking. "Ma loved him once, but he threw us away. And now Thomas is using me to settle his score with him. I'm just a pawn." Samuel shook his head, stepping closer but keeping his distance. "You're no pawn, Emma. You're a person. And you're worth fighting for." Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked back tears, nodding. "Jasper, watching from the corner, piped up, his voice small but fierce. "He's right, miss. My pa says folks like you got heart. That's why I came back." Emma's lips curved in a faint smile, and Samuel felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. But the moment shattered as a low rumble reached them. The creak of a wagon, the thud of hooves. Samuel moved to the window, peering out. A wagon approached, flanked by Caleb Vance and his men, dragging a crude wooden crate behind it. The crate scraped the earth, leaving a trail of splintered wood. A message, meant to terrify. "Stay here," Samuel told Emma and Jasper, his voice hard. He stepped onto the porch, rifle raised, as Caleb dismounted, his scarred face twisted in a smirk. "Times."
"Up, Hayes," Caleb called.
"Garrett's here, and he ain't happy. Brought a gift to show you what happens to folks who cross Develin." He kicked the crate, and it splintered open, revealing a pile of broken tools, shovels, axes, a rusted plow. Samuel's tools, stolen from his shed days ago, now destroyed. Samuel's blood boiled, but he kept his aim steady. "Where's Garrett?" he demanded. Caleb jerked his head toward the wagon, where a man climbed down. Thomas Garrett, lean and hollow-eyed, his coat stained with whiskey and dust. His gaze locked onto the cabin, and Samuel saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, quickly, masked by bravado. "Emma!" Garrett shouted, his voice slurred. "Get out here, girl, or I'll burn this place to the ground!" Emma's gasp behind Samuel was soft, but piercing. He didn't turn, his eyes on Garrett. "She's not yours to call," he said, his voice like iron. "You lost that right when you tied her to my fence." Garrett's laugh was ugly, but Caleb cut him off, stepping forward. "Enough talk. Develin's orders are clear. The girl, or your ranch burns. What's it gonna be, Hayes?" Samuel's finger rested on the trigger, his heart pounding with a clarity he hadn't felt since the war. He could shoot now, take Caleb down, but Garrett's men would swarm. And Emma. She deserved better than a bloodbath. As he weighed his choice, a shadow moved on the ridge beyond the wagon. Another rider watching from afar. Friend or foe? Samuel couldn't tell. But one thing was certain. This fight was far from over. Who is the mysterious rider watching from the ridge, and what will Samuel risk to protect Emma from her stepfather's wrath? Keep watching to find out. The sun climbed higher, bathing the Wyoming prairie in a harsh light that hid nothing. Not the splintered crate at Samuel's feet. Not the sweat beading on Thomas Garrett's brow. Not the cold calculation in Caleb Vance's eyes. Samuel stood firm on his porch, rifle trained on Caleb, but his mind was on the rider he'd glimpsed on the ridge. A scout? A reinforcement? Or something else entirely? Inside the cabin, Emma clutched the pistol, her breathing shallow, while Jasper peered through a crack in the shutters, his slingshot ready despite Samuel's orders to stay put. Garrett staggered forward, his voice a snarl. "You think you can keep her, Hayes? She's mine by law. Develin will have your head for this." Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "Law don't mean much when you leave a girl to die," he said. "And Develin's no god. He bleeds like any man." Caleb's smirk faltered, but he raised a hand, signaling his men to hold. "Bold words," he said. "But you're one man against 6, and Garrett here says the girl's got something Develin wants, something you don't even know about." Samuel's eyes flicked to Emma, who stood frozen, her locket glinting like a beacon. Something Develin wants, her blood tied to him? Or was there more to her story? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on Caleb. If Develin wants her so bad, why send a drunk and a pack of dogs to fetch her? Garrett lunged, but Caleb grabbed his arm, shoving him back. "Easy, Thomas. Hayes is just stalling." He turned to Samuel, his voice low. "You got 10 minutes to send her out, or we light this place up. Develin don't need the girl alive, just accounted for." The threat hung heavy, and Samuel felt Emma's eyes on his back, trusting him to find a way out. He thought of the ridge, the rocky outcropping a half-mile off where he'd hunted as a boy. It was good cover, with clear sight lines and narrow paths, hard for horses, easy to defend. If he could get Emma there, they might hold out until what? Help wasn't coming. But he'd learned long ago that hope was a choice, not a guarantee. "Jasper," Samuel said, low enough for only the boy to hear. "You know the rock ridge past the creek?" "Yes, sir," Jasper whispered, his eyes bright with fear and excitement. "When I say, you take Emma and run for it. Don't look back." Jasper nodded, and Samuel turned to Emma, his voice urgent but calm. "You trust me?" She nodded, gripping the pistol tighter. "I do." Samuel stepped forward, raising his voice. "All right, Caleb. You want her? Come. Get her. But you'll have to shoot me first." Caleb's eyes narrowed, sensing a trap, but Garrett's patience snapped. "Enough!" he roared, drawing his gun. The shot went wide, splintering the porch rail, and chaos erupted. Samuel fired, dropping one of Caleb's men, then dove behind a water trough as bullets tore through the air. Emma screamed, but Jasper grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back window. "Go!" Samuel shouted, firing again to cover their escape. He saw Emma climb through the window, Jasper close behind, their figures darting toward the creek. Relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. Caleb's men split, two circling the cabin, while Garrett stumbled toward the wagon, shouting curses. Samuel reloaded, his hands steady despite the odds. 5 against 1, and the rider on the ridge was still a wild card. He scanned the horizon, catching a glint of metal from the rocks. A signal. Before he could think, a new sound reached him. Hoofbeats, heavy and fast, from the north. A second wagon crested the hill, flanked by 4 riders, their hats pulled low. At their head rode a man in a black coat, his silver hair catching the sun. Marcus Develin. Samuel's heart sank. Develin's presence changed everything. The man dismounted with the ease of a king, his pale eyes sweeping the scene like he owned it. "Enough!" Develin called, his voice cutting through the gunfire. The shooting stopped, Caleb's men freezing in place. "Hayes," Develin said, stepping forward, his boots crunching on the dirt. "You've got my daughter. Let's talk." Samuel's blood ran cold. Daughter. So Emma's fear was true. He kept his rifle raised, his voice steady. "She's not yours. You threw her away." Develin's smile was thin, almost regretful. "A mistake I mean to fix. Hand her over and you walk away. Defy me and this ranch becomes your grave." Samuel glanced toward the ridge, where Emma and Jasper were hidden, if they'd made it. He thought of the locket, the prayer book, the girl who'd trusted him with her life. He'd spent 20 years avoiding trouble, but now, facing Develin, he felt a clarity he'd never known. "She's not a thing to be traded," he said, "and I'm not walking away." Develin's eyes darkened, but before he could reply, a sharp crack echoed from the ridge, a rifle shot. One of Caleb's men fell, clutching his shoulder, and Samuel saw a puff of smoke from the rocks. Emma, or Jasper. Either way, they were fighting back. Develin's men scrambled, and Samuel seized the moment, diving for cover behind the wagon. As bullets flew, the fight was on, and the prairie was about to run red. But as Samuel fired, one question burned. What did Develin truly want with Emma, and what price would he pay to claim her? Will Emma and Jasper hold the ridge against Develin's? Men, and what secret drives Develin to claim his daughter now? Stay tuned for the explosive truth. The ridge was a fortress of stone, its jagged peaks offering shelter, but no mercy. Emma crouched behind a boulder, her pistol shaking in her hands, the shot she'd fired still ringing in her ears. Jasper knelt beside her, his slingshot loaded. With a sharp stone, his freckled face set with a courage that belied his 12 years. Below, the prairie churned with chaos. Samuel's rifle cracked from behind the wagon, holding off Caleb's men, while Marcus Develin stood like a dark monument, barking orders to his riders. The air smelled of gunpowder and fear, and Emma's heart pounded with a single truth. She'd never go back. "You hit him good, miss," Jasper whispered, peering through a gap in the rocks. "But they're coming. 2 men, heading this way." Emma nodded, her breath hitching. The locket at her throat felt heavy. Her mother's photograph inside a reminder of why she fought. She thought of Samuel, risking everything for a girl he barely knew, and of Jasper, who could have run but stayed. "Jasper," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "If I don't make it, you tell Samuel. Tell him." "He gave me hope." Jasper's eyes widened. "Don't talk like that. We're getting out, all of us." Before she could reply, a bullet ricocheted off the rock above, showering them with dust. Emma ducked, her training with Samuel kicking in. She aimed, fired, and heard a man curse below. Not a kill, but enough to slow them. Jasper let his slingshot fly, the stone striking another man's hand, sending his gun spinning. The boy grinned, fierce and proud, but Emma's relief was cut short by a new sound, a low, ominous creak from the prairie. Develin's men had unhitched the second wagon, rolling it toward the ridge, its bed piled with dry brush. A torch flickered. In Caleb's hand, his scarred face twisted in a grin. They meant to smoke them out. Emma's stomach lurched, but she forced herself to focus. "Jasper, stay low," she said, reloading with fumbling fingers. Below, Samuel saw the wagon and knew time was running out. He'd taken down 2 of Develin's men, but Caleb and 3 others still pressed him, their bullets tearing through the wagon's wood. Develin himself stood back, his silver hair unmoved by the wind, his eyes fixed on the ridge. Samuel's gaze followed, catching a glint from the rocks. Emma's locket, reflecting the sun. She was alive, fighting, but the wagon would end that soon. "Develin!" Samuel shouted, stepping out from cover, his rifle aimed at the man's chest. "Call off your dogs, or I drop you now." Develin turned, his expression unreadable. "You're a fool, Hayes," he said. "She's my blood, my legacy. You think you can keep her from me?" "She's not your anything," Samuel shot back. "You abandoned her. What kind of man claims a daughter with bullets and fire?" Develin's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Samuel saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret or shame. But it vanished as Caleb lit the brush, flames licking up the wagon's sides. The blaze roared to life, rolling closer to the ridge. Samuel fired, grazing Caleb's arm, but the man didn't falter, his torch held high. On the ridge, Emma coughed as smoke curled through the rocks, her eyes stinging. Jasper tugged her sleeve, pointing to a narrow path winding down the back. "We can make it to the creek," he said. "Lose him in the willows." Emma hesitated, her gaze on the prairie, where Samuel fought alone. She couldn't leave him. But Jasper's pleading eyes reminded her of the promise she'd made, to survive, to honor her mother's memory. She nodded, grabbing his hand, and they scrambled down the path, the fire's heat at their backs. Samuel saw the smoke thicken, his heart sinking. Had they made it out? He couldn't know, but he had to trust Emma's strength. He turned to Develin, his voice raw. "You'll burn your own daughter to prove a point. What kind of father are you?" Develin's face twitched, and for the first time his composure cracked. "You know nothing," he said, his voice low. "I lost her once because I was weak. I won't lose her again." Samuel saw his chance. "Then prove it. Stop this. Let her choose." Develin hesitated, his hand hovering near his pistol. Caleb, blood dripping from his arm, laughed bitterly. "She's as good as dead, boss. Let's finish this." But Develin raised a hand, silencing him. "Hold," he said, his eyes locked on Samuel's. The flames roared closer, but no one moved. Samuel's pulse thundered, every second a gamble. Then, from the creek, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Jasper's signal. They'd made it. Relief flooded Samuel, but it was short-lived. Develin's men regrouped, and Caleb, ignoring his boss, tossed another torch into the wagon. The flames, surging higher, the ridge was lost, and Samuel knew the fight was far from over. But as he dove for cover, one truth burned clear. Emma was free for now, and he'd fight to keep her that way. Will Samuel find Emma and Jasper before Develin's flames consume everything? And what will Develin sacrifice to reclaim his daughter? Don't miss the heart-pounding finale. The Wyoming prairie lay quiet as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. The ridge smoldered, its rocks blackened by the fire that had nearly claimed Emma and Jasper. Samuel stood by the creek, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his face streaked with sweat and soot. Emma sat on a fallen log, her locket open in her hands, her green eyes tracing her mother's faded photograph. Jasper hovered nearby, his slingshot tucked in his pocket, his freckled face beaming with pride. They'd survived. But the cost was written in the scars they carried, some visible, some not. Hours earlier, the fight had ended in a way no one expected. Develin, faced with Samuel's defiance and the whistle from the creek, had faltered. His men, loyal but uncertain, had lowered their guns at his command. Caleb, furious, had lunged for Develin, but a single shot from the silver-haired man dropped him in the dirt. Develin had turned to Samuel, his voice heavy with a truth he'd buried for 16 years. "She's better off without me," he'd said, tossing a leather pouch to Samuel's feet. "Take her far from here. Give her the life I couldn't." Inside the pouch was enough gold to start over. Colorado, maybe, or Oregon, where the prairie gave way to forests and new beginnings. Develin had mounted his horse, his men following, and ridden into the dust, leaving only silence behind. Now, as the stars began to peek through the twilight, Samuel knelt beside Emma, his gray eyes soft but searching. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, closing the locket with a soft click. "I think so. For the first time in a long time." She looked at him, her voice steady. "You didn't have to do this, Samuel. Why did you?" He smiled, a rare, warm thing that softened the lines of his face. "Because you reminded me what it means to stand for something. And because I think your ma would have wanted it." Emma's eyes shimmered, but she smiled back, a spark of hope kindling within her. Jasper, unable to stay quiet, piped up. "You're both heroes. You know that? I'm going to tell everyone at the Miller Ranch." Samuel chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Keep it quiet, Jasper. We've had enough trouble for one lifetime." They packed what little they needed: Emma's prayer book, Samuel's tools, a few provisions from the cabin. The ranch, scarred but standing, would wait for another owner. As they loaded a borrowed wagon, Samuel thought of the locket, the button, the book, small things that had woven their story together. He thought of Develin, a man broken by his own choices, and of Emma, who'd chosen to be more than her past. The wagon creaked as they rolled toward Colorado, the prairie stretching, vast and forgiving behind them. Emma sat beside Samuel, her locket gleaming in the fading light, her future unwritten, but hers to claim. Jasper chatted about the adventures ahead, and Samuel listened, a quiet contentment settling in his chest. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't running from anything. He was heading toward something new. This story, like so many from the Wild West, speaks to the heart of a time when courage and compassion could carve hope from hardship. Women like Emma faced unthinkable challenges: abandonment, exploitation, the weight of men's debts, but their resilience shaped the frontier as much as any gunslinger's legend. If you're curious about the real history of Wyoming's women, or the cattle barons like Develin, who ruled with iron and gold, let me know in the comments below. And if this tale of heart and heroism touched you, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join our journey through the West. What do you think lies ahead for Emma and Samuel in Colorado? Drop your thoughts below, and let's keep the story alive. What adventures await Emma, Samuel, and Jasper in Colorado, and will their past ever catch up to them? Subscribe and stay tuned for more tales from the Wild West.